The security guard wouldn't even look at me as he shook his head. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but your name isn't on the approved list for the Meridian Industries board meeting this morning. You'll need to leave the premises immediately. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stood there in my best navy suit, the one I'd saved 3 months to buy, clutching my leather portfolio while my older brother Marcus smirked from across the marble lobby of the 60-story downtown tower. Next to him, my sister Elena adjusted her designer blazer and whispered something that made them both laugh. They'd arrived 20 minutes earlier in Marcus's Tesla, making sure to walk past me in the parking garage without so much as a glance. "I told you this was embarrassing, Sarah," Marcus called, loud enough for the security guard and several other suited executives to hear. "You can't just show up to Fortune 500 board meetings because you think you deserve to be there. This isn't one of your fancy novels." Elena stepped forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "Sweetie, we know losing your job at the marketing firm was hard, but this delusion that you're somehow connected to Meridian Industries needs to stop. It's getting uncomfortable for the whole family." The security guard's expression softened slightly, now viewing me as some sort of unstable person rather than a potential threat. "Ma'am, perhaps you'd like me to call someone for you, a family member?" "They are my family," I said quietly, watching as Marcus and Elena exchanged another one of their looks. The same look they'd been giving me since we were children, the one that said I was the dreamer, the odd one out, the sister who never quite fit into their world of practical expectations and conventional success. 6 months earlier, I'd been riding high. My small digital marketing consultancy had just landed its biggest client ever, and I was finally starting to feel like I could prove my siblings wrong. Marcus worked in finance, climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious investment firm, while Elena had married into money and spent her days managing charity galas and country club committees. They'd always seen my entrepreneurial ventures as cute hobbies, something I'd eventually grow out of when I got serious about finding a real job. But then everything fell apart. My biggest client, a tech startup that accounted for 70% of my revenue, suddenly went under when their funding dried up. Within 2 weeks, I'd lost 3 other clients who got spooked by the association. By November, I was behind on rent, my business was essentially dead, and I was back to living in the spare bedroom of my childhood friend's apartment, trying to figure out what went wrong. The family dinner where everything came to a head happened 3 weeks ago. Mom had made her famous pot roast, and Dad was in one of his nostalgic moods, talking about the early days when he'd first started Hartwell Construction with nothing but a pickup truck and a dream. Marcus and Elena were discussing vacation plans, some resort in the Bahamas where Elena's husband had connections. "Sarah's going through a rough patch right now," Elena had announced when Dad asked why I seemed quiet. Her little business venture didn't work out. "It's not dead," I'd protested. "I'm rebuilding. I've been researching this company called Meridian Industries, and I think there might be an opportunity there. They're expanding their digital presence, and from what I can tell, they're not happy with their current marketing strategy." Marcus nearly choked on his wine. "Meridian Industries? Sarah, that's a Fortune 500 company. They don't work with freelancers operating out of spare bedrooms." "You don't understand," I'd continued, feeling my face flush but pushing through anyway. "I've been following their quarterly reports, their social media engagement, their competitor analysis. Their current agency is completely missing the mark with millennials and Gen Z. I could show them strategies that would increase their market share in those demographics by at least 15%. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad cleared his throat awkwardly, Mom busied herself with clearing dishes that were still full, and my siblings exchanged that look again. "Honey," Elena said in her most patronizing voice, "Meridian Industries has a marketing budget bigger than most small countries' GDP. They work with agencies that have offices in New York, London, and Tokyo. They don't need advice from someone who couldn't keep a local startup afloat." "Besides," Marcus added, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd never failed at anything, Even if your ideas had merit, which is debatable, you have no way to get them in front of decision makers. These companies have layers of gatekeepers, procurement processes, vendor requirements. You can't just walk into their headquarters and demand a meeting. I tried to explain that I wasn't planning to walk in blindly, that I'd been researching their corporate structure, their leadership team, their recent strategic initiatives. But the more I talked, the more they seemed convinced that I was having some sort of breakdown, that grief over my failed business was making me delusional about my prospects. Maybe it's time to consider something more stable, Dad had suggested gently. I know a guy who manages a marketing department at the regional hospital. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work with good benefits. That's when I'd made the mistake of mentioning the board meeting. Actually, I heard through industry contacts that Meridian is holding an emergency board meeting next month. Apparently, their Q4 numbers were disappointing, and they're looking at major strategic shifts. If I could somehow get 5 minutes to present my analysis. The explosion of laughter from Marcus had been immediate and brutal. An emergency board meeting? Sarah, do you even hear yourself? You think you're going to crash a Fortune 500 board meeting with some PowerPoint presentation you threw together? It's not thrown together, I'd said defensively. I've spent weeks on this research. I know exactly what they're doing wrong and how to fix it. This is actually concerning now, Elena had said, her voice taking on that clinical tone she used when discussing her children's behavioral issues with her therapist friends. Sarah, you're talking about infiltrating corporate board meetings like you're some kind of business spy. This isn't normal. The intervention had continued for another hour, with Mom and Dad growing increasingly worried, and my siblings becoming more convinced that I needed professional help, or at least a serious reality check. By the time I left that night, they'd made it clear that they thought my Meridian obsession was a symptom of a larger problem, something that required me to accept my limitations and scale back my ambitions to something more appropriate for my station in life. But I couldn't let it go. Every day for the next 3 weeks, I dove deeper into my research. I analyzed Meridian's stock performance, their customer satisfaction ratings, their employee reviews on company culture sites. I studied their competitors, their market positioning, their missed opportunities. And the more I learned, the more convinced I became that I was right, that they were making fundamental mistakes that a fresh perspective could solve. I also spent those weeks trying to figure out how to get into that board meeting. Marcus wasn't wrong about the layers of gatekeepers and security protocols. Meridian Industries didn't just let random people walk into their corporate headquarters, especially not for emergency board meetings that would determine the company's direction for the next fiscal year. But I'd found something interesting in my research, something that gave me hope. The meeting was being held at the downtown Grandview Tower, not at Meridian's main campus. It was a neutral location, which suggested they might be meeting with external stakeholders, potential partners, or acquisition targets. And neutral locations meant different security protocols, different access points, different possibilities. I'd also discovered that the meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning on a Tuesday, which meant executives would be arriving between 8:30 and 8:45. If I could position myself in the right place at the right time, maybe I could find a way to at least get my research in front of someone who mattered. My siblings, of course, had no idea about any of this continued investigation. As far as they knew, I dropped the Meridian idea after their intervention and was focusing on more realistic job prospects. Elena had even sent me listings for administrative positions at her husband's law firm, just until you get back on your feet. Now, standing in the marble lobby with security telling me to leave while Marcus and Elena watched my public humiliation, I realized that they'd somehow found out about my plan. But how? I'd been careful not to mention it at family gatherings, hadn't posted anything on social media, hadn't told anyone except, "How did you know I'd be here?" I asked them directly. Marcus's smile was triumphant. "Mom was worried about you after you missed Sunday dinner last week. She asked me to check in, see how you were doing." Imagine my surprise when I found detailed floor plans of this building on your laptop, along with corporate headshots of Meridian executives and a presentation titled "The Future of Digital Marketing Strategy." My stomach dropped. I'd been working on everything at Mom and Dad's house last weekend while they were out of town, using their faster internet connection to download quarterly reports and industry analyses. I must have forgotten to clear my browser history or close the files. "We're trying to save you from yourself," Elena added, her voice filled with what she probably thought was compassion. "This fantasy has gone too far. You can't keep chasing these impossible dreams while your real life falls apart around you." The security guard was looking increasingly uncomfortable with the family drama playing out in his lobby. "Ma'am, I really need to ask you to leave now. The meeting participants will be arriving soon, and we can't have unauthorized individuals in the building." As I turned toward the exit, briefcase in hand and cheeks burning with embarrassment, I caught sight of something that made my heart race. Walking through the revolving doors was a woman I recognized immediately from my research, Catherine Price, Meridian Industries' chief marketing officer. She was exactly as polished and intimidating as her corporate headshot suggested, moving through the lobby with the confidence of someone who belonged in rooms where million-dollar decisions were made. What my siblings didn't know, what even I had only discovered 2 days ago through a deep dive into public records and corporate filings, was that Catherine Price wasn't just attending this board meeting. She was fighting for her professional life. Meridian's disappointing Q4 numbers had put her entire department under scrutiny, and according to industry rumors I'd found buried in trade publication sections, today's meeting would determine whether she kept her job or became the scapegoat for the company's marketing failures. And what none of them knew was that I had information that could either save her career or end it forever. I stepped outside into the cold morning air, my mind racing as Marcus and Elena disappeared into the elevator with satisfied expressions. They thought they'd won, thought they'd finally proven that their delusional little sister needed to accept reality and stop reaching for things beyond her grasp. But they'd made a critical mistake in their eagerness to humiliate me. They'd gotten me inside the building. During those precious few minutes in the lobby, I'd seen everything I needed to see. The elevator bank Catherine Price had used led to floors 40 through 60. The security desk had a shift change at 8:45, right when the morning rush would create maximum chaos. And most importantly, I'd spotted the service corridor near the restrooms that connected to the building's main conference facilities. But none of that mattered without the ace I'd been holding back, the piece of information I'd discovered during my deep research that even I hadn't fully believed until yesterday. I pulled out my phone and opened the encrypted folder where I'd stored the documents. 3 months ago, while investigating Meridian's marketing failures, I'd stumbled across something strange in their vendor payment records. The public filings showed massive payments to their current marketing agency, Blackstone Creative, but the timing didn't match their campaign launches. More puzzling, the payments continued even during months when Blackstone had publicly announced they were working on other major accounts that should have conflicted with Meridian's needs. At first, I'd assumed it was just corporate bureaucracy, delayed billing cycles, or retainer agreements. But the more I dug, the more suspicious it became. I'd cross-referenced the payment dates with Meridian stock price movements, and every single payment to Blackstone coincided with strategic leaks to trade publications about Meridian's upcoming product launches or financial projections. The breakthrough had come when I'd found a cached version of an internal email thread that had been accidentally posted to a public server for exactly 4 hours before being taken down. In it, someone at Blackstone Creative was coordinating with an unnamed contact at Meridian to time the release of preliminary market research that consistently painted Meridian's competitors in a negative light while boosting confidence in Meridian's strategic direction. It was insider trading, plain and simple. Blackstone Creative wasn't just managing Meridian's marketing budget, they were using confidential information to manipulate stock prices and coordinate trades through shell companies. And the unnamed contact facilitating it all had an email signature that read CP Strategic Communications Director. Catherine Price wasn't just facing termination for poor marketing performance. She was the inside source for a securities fraud scheme that had been generating millions in illegal profits for the past 18 months. I walked 3 blocks to a coffee shop and found a corner table where I could think. My original plan had been to present my marketing analysis and hope someone would give me 5 minutes to prove my worth. But now, I was sitting on evidence of federal crimes, and Catherine Price was walking into a board meeting where she'd either blame her department's failures on market conditions and keep her job, or she'd become the fall guy for problems that ran much deeper than anyone realized. The question was, what did I do with this information? I could contact the SEC, but that would take months to investigate, and by then, the damage to Meridian would be enormous. I could try to reach someone at Meridian directly, but who would believe a failed entrepreneur with no credentials and no connections? Or I could find a way to use this information to get exactly what I'd come here for, a seat at that conference table. I spent 20 minutes crafting a message, revising it until every word carried maximum impact. Then I found Catherine Price's direct email address, the one I discovered buried in those leaked internal documents, and sent a single paragraph. Miss Price, I have detailed documentation of the financial relationship between Meridian Industries and Blackstone Creative, including evidence of coordinated stock manipulation and insider trading that will be of significant interest to the SEC. I'm currently in the lobby of Grandview Tower and would appreciate 5 minutes of your time before the board meeting begins. I believe we can find a mutually beneficial solution to our respective challenges. Sarah Chen, 555-0147. I hit send at 8:53. By 8:55, my phone was ringing. Miss Chen, this is Catherine Price. I think there's been some misunderstanding. I'm not sure what you think you know, but making vague accusations about securities violations isn't something I'd recommend. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tension underneath. She was scared. The shell company is called Nordic Strategic Holdings, I said quietly. The bank routing number ends in 4729. The largest single transaction was $2.4 million, transferred 3 days before Meridian announced their acquisition of the Palmer Technologies patents. Blackstone Creative initiated a short position on Palmer's primary competitor 6 hours before your press release went live. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. "Where are you?" she asked finally. "Cafe Luna, 3 blocks east of your building. I'm wearing a navy suit and sitting by the window facing the street." "Stay there. Don't move. Don't call anyone. Don't send any messages. I'll be there in 8 minutes." The line went dead. I ordered another coffee and tried to keep my hands from shaking. This was either the biggest breakthrough of my professional life, or I was about to be arrested for attempted extortion, possibly both. Catherine Price arrived in exactly 7 minutes, moving through the cafe with the same commanding presence I'd observed in the lobby. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made it clear how she'd risen to C-suite level at a Fortune 500 company. She sat across from me without ordering anything. "You have 60 seconds to tell me what you want," she said. "I want what I came for, a presentation opportunity to the Meridian board about your company's digital marketing strategy failures and how to fix them." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're blackmailing me for a job interview?" "I'm offering you a solution. Your board meeting starts in 15 minutes. In that meeting, you're going to be asked to explain why Meridian's market share among consumers under 35 has dropped 8% in the last year, why your competitor analysis has been consistently wrong, and why your department's recommendations have cost the company approximately $40 million in missed opportunities." Her expression didn't change, but I saw her jaw tighten slightly. "You can walk into that room and try to deflect responsibility. Maybe buy yourself a few more months before the SEC investigation that's inevitably coming destroys your career and possibly lands you in federal prison. Or you can walk in with a comprehensive analysis of where your strategy went wrong and a detailed plan to fix it, presented by a consultant who identified the problems your current agency missed. And in exchange? In exchange, the documentation I've compiled about Blackstone Creative's activities gets sealed in a safety deposit box instead of being forwarded to the Securities and Exchange Commission, permanently sealed, assuming certain parties maintain clean financial practices going forward. Catherine Price stared at me for a long moment. I could see her calculating odds, weighing risks, trying to figure out if I was bluffing about the evidence or naive about the legal implications of what I was proposing. "How do I know you actually have what you claim to have?" I pulled out my tablet and opened a folder. On the screen was a banking record showing a wire transfer from Nordic Strategic Holdings to a Cayman Islands account, dated the same day Meridian had announced their biggest quarterly earnings beat in company history. Below it was an email thread between someone identified only as CP and a Blackstone Creative account manager discussing the timing of a preliminary competitive analysis that would be leaked to industry publications. Her face went pale. "The full documentation is stored in multiple secure locations," I said quietly. "But like I said, I'm not interested in destroying careers or bringing down companies. I'm interested in solving business problems." She closed the tablet and leaned back in her chair. "Assuming I could arrange something, what exactly would you present?" "A complete analysis of why your current digital marketing strategy is failing, specifically focused on the demographic shifts your competitors are exploiting while Meridian falls behind. Concrete recommendations for platform-specific content strategies, influencer partnership frameworks, and data analytics approaches that could recapture your lost market share within 6 months." You really think you can fix in one presentation what my entire department hasn't been able to solve in 2 years? "I think your department has been focused on the wrong metrics because they've been getting bad intelligence from compromised sources. When you remove the deliberate misinformation and focus on actual consumer behavior data, the solutions become obvious." Catherine Price stood up, her decision made. "The board meeting is in conference room 4B, 52nd floor. I'll introduce you as an independent consultant I've brought in for a strategic assessment. You'll have exactly 10 minutes to present your findings. That's all I need. And, Miss Chen," she paused at the cafe door, "if you're wrong about any of this, if your presentation doesn't deliver what you're promising, our conversation about those documents becomes very different." I watched her walk back toward Grandview Tower, then gathered my materials and followed. My siblings thought they'd humiliated me into giving up on my delusional dreams. Instead, they delivered me directly to the most important opportunity of my life.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The elevator ride to the 52nd floor felt like it lasted forever. When the doors opened, I stepped into a hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, heading toward a conference room where 12 of the most powerful executives in the region were about to discover that their biggest problem wasn't market conditions or consumer trends. Their biggest problem was that they'd been trusting the wrong people with their most sensitive information, and the person who could solve it had just walked in wearing a 3-month-old suit and carrying everything they needed to know in a leather portfolio. Conference room 4B was exactly what I'd imagined, a massive table surrounded by leather chairs with presentation screens at both ends and the kind of view that reminded everyone in the room how high the stakes really were. Catherine Price was already there, talking quietly with a silver-haired man who had to be the CEO, based on how everyone else was positioned around him. In exactly 3 minutes, I was going to find out if my research was as bulletproof as I believed it was, and whether the most important presentation of my life would save 2 careers or destroy them both. The silver-haired CEO, who Catherine quickly introduced as David Morrison, looked me up and down with the kind of expression reserved for unexpected interruptions. "Miss Price, we have a very full agenda this morning. I'm not sure this is the time for external consultations." "With respect, Mr. Morrison, this is exactly the time." Catherine's voice carried more confidence than I'd heard from her in the cafe. "Miss Chen has identified critical flaws in our current digital strategy that directly impact the quarterly performance issues we're here to address." The room fell silent as 12 executives turned their attention to me. I recognized several faces from my research: the chief financial officer who'd been questioning marketing expenses for months, the head of strategic development who'd publicly criticized the company's youth market positioning, and the vice president of sales whose team had been complaining about lead quality from digital campaigns. I moved to the presentation screen and connected my laptop, grateful that my hands had stopped shaking somewhere between the elevator and this moment. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 4 months, Meridian Industries has lost significant market share to competitors who aren't necessarily offering better products, but who are reaching consumers more effectively through digital channels. The first slide showed a comparison chart of engagement rates across social media platforms. Meridian's numbers were consistently below industry averages, while their 2 main competitors had seen dramatic increases in the same period. Your current agency, Blackstone Creative, has been focusing on broad demographic targeting and traditional digital advertising metrics, but they've missed a fundamental shift in how your target consumers discover and evaluate products. I clicked to the next slide, which broke down consumer behavior patterns by age group and platform preference. For example, consumers aged 25 to 34, which represents your highest value demographic, have decreased their reliance on traditional search advertising by 43% in the last 18 months. Instead, they're making purchasing decisions based on peer recommendations through platforms like Discord, Reddit, and TikTok, where Meridian has virtually no presence. The CFO leaned forward. Our agency assured us that TikTok was primarily teenagers posting dance videos. They said it wasn't suitable for B2B technology marketing. That assessment is 18 months out of date, I replied, clicking to a slide showing TikTok's demographic evolution. The platform now has more users over 25 than under 18 in urban markets. More importantly, tech influencers on TikTok are driving purchasing decisions for enterprise software and business services at unprecedented rates. I walked them through case study after case study, showing how Meridian's competitors had gained ground by embracing platform-specific content strategies, micro-influencer partnerships, and community-driven marketing approaches that Blackstone Creative had either ignored or actively discouraged. But here's where it gets interesting, I said, moving to what I knew would be the most compelling part of my presentation. The data suggests that someone has been systematically feeding your agency incorrect information about these trends. The room's energy shifted immediately. Morrison sat up straighter, and I saw several board members exchange glances. I've analyzed the market research reports that Blackstone Creative provided to justify their strategic recommendations. Their competitor analysis consistently underestimated the effectiveness of the exact tactics that your rivals were using to gain market share. Either they're incompetent, which seems unlikely given their other client successes, or they've been working from flawed intelligence. Catherine Price spoke up, her voice carefully neutral. What kind of flawed intelligence? The kind that benefits from keeping Meridian's digital marketing ineffective while competitors gain ground, I said, clicking to a slide that showed stock price movements. Someone has been profiting from Meridian's strategic mistakes. The next 20 minutes were the most intense of my professional life. I laid out a comprehensive strategy for recapturing lost market share, complete with platform-specific content calendars, influencer partnership frameworks, and measurable performance metrics that would show results within 90 days. But more than that, I demonstrated exactly how Meridian's current approach was leaving money on the table, while their competitors capitalized on opportunities that should have been obvious. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment that felt like an eternity. The CFO was the first to speak. Ms. Chen, the strategies you're outlining would require completely restructuring our digital marketing approach. Are you suggesting we terminate our relationship with Blackstone Creative? I'm suggesting you conduct a thorough audit of the advice they've been providing and the results they've delivered. If the evidence supports maintaining that relationship, then at minimum, their strategy needs fundamental changes. If the evidence suggests they've been providing guidance that benefits parties other than Meridian, then you have bigger decisions to make. Morrison looked directly at Catherine. Ms. Price, how long have we been working with Blackstone Creative? 18 months. They came highly recommended, and their initial proposals were very compelling. And in those 18 months, our digital marketing ROI has consistently underperformed expectations, while our competitors have gained ground using strategies that, according to Ms. Chen's presentation, should have been obvious to any competent agency. Catherine nodded slowly. The pattern is difficult to ignore. Ms. Chen, Morrison turned back to me. If we were to implement the strategies you've outlined, what would you need in terms of timeline and resources? My heart was racing, but I kept my voice steady. I would need 3 weeks to conduct a complete audit of your current digital assets and establish baseline metrics. Implementation could begin immediately after that, with measurable results visible within 60 days and significant impact within 90. And your fee structure? This was the moment I'd been preparing for since I'd first discovered the opportunity. I propose a performance-based contract, base consultation fee, plus percentage of measurable revenue increase directly attributable to the new strategies. If the approach doesn't deliver the results I've projected, Meridian pays only the base fee. The head of strategic development smiled for the first time since I'd entered the room. That's the kind of confidence in results we haven't seen from our current agency. Morrison looked around the table, reading the room. I think we need to vote on this. All in favor of engaging Miss Chen for a 90-day performance-based digital marketing strategy overhaul? 11 hands went up immediately. Catherine Price raised hers last, but her smile was genuine. Motion carried. Morrison stood up. Miss Price, please work with Miss Chen to establish the contract terms and timeline. I want a full report on the Blackstone creative audit within 2 weeks. As the board members filed out, several stopped to shake my hand and ask for my business card. The CFO mentioned that he'd been looking for exactly this kind of innovative thinking. The head of strategic development said she'd like to discuss how similar principles might apply to their product development timeline. Catherine Price was the last to leave. Miss Chen, I think this partnership is going to be very beneficial for both of us. And regarding those documents we discussed earlier, I assume they'll remain confidential as long as all parties maintain ethical business practices going forward? Absolutely. I'm much more interested in building businesses than tearing them down. After she left, I stood alone in the conference room, looking out at the city's skyline and trying to process what had just happened. 6 hours ago, I'd been a failed entrepreneur being humiliated by my siblings in a building lobby. Now I was the lead digital marketing strategist for a Fortune 500 company with a contract that could transform my career. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. Hope you learned your lesson today. Mom wants to know if you'll be at Sunday dinner. Maybe we can discuss some realistic job opportunities. I smiled and typed back. I'll be there. Actually have some exciting news to share about my new consulting contract with Meridian Industries. Looking forward to catching up. The response came back within 30 seconds. Very funny, Sarah. You don't have to keep up the fantasy. We all saw what happened this morning. Instead of responding, I took a photo of the Meridian Industries logo on the conference room wall and sent it with a message. Contract signing is Thursday. Should make for interesting dinner conversation. My phone immediately started ringing. Marcus, Sarah, where are you? How did you get that photo? I'm in Meridian's executive conference room. The board meeting just ended. Turns out they were very interested in my analysis of their digital marketing failures. The silence stretched for several seconds. That's impossible. Security escorted you out. Elena and I watched you leave. Security escorted me out of the lobby. They never said I couldn't come back through different channels. I sat down in one of the leather chairs, enjoying the feeling of belonging in a room like this. Marcus, remember when you said I couldn't just walk into Fortune 500 board meetings? You were right. I couldn't walk in, but I could be invited in by someone who recognized the value of what I was offering. But how did I get a meeting with Catherine Price? How did I convince her to present my ideas to the board? How did I turn a humiliating rejection into the biggest contract of my career? I paused, looking out at the city spread below. I did my homework. I found information that mattered to people who could make decisions. And I proved that sometimes the person everyone thinks is delusional about success is actually the only one seeing the situation clearly. Elena's voice came through the phone speaker. She'd clearly been listening on another extension. Sarah, we were trying to protect you from embarrassment. I know you were, but you protected me based on your assumptions about what was possible, not on what I'd actually discovered or what I was capable of achieving. I stood up and gathered my materials. The thing about reaching for impossible dreams is that sometimes you have to fail at them before you learn how to succeed. And sometimes what looks like delusion to people who've never tried is actually just preparation meeting opportunity. Marcus cleared his throat. So this Meridian contract, it's real? Very real. Performance-based with potential for significant expansion if the 90-day results meet projections, which they will. How can you be so confident? I walked toward the elevator, passing framed photos of Meridian's leadership team and their various corporate achievements, because I spent 6 months researching every aspect of their business while you both assumed I was having a breakdown. I know their problems better than their current agency does. I know their competitors' strategies better than their internal team does, and I know their market opportunities better than anyone else they could have hired. The elevator arrived and I stepped in. I'll see you both Sunday. And Marcus, you might want to update your assumptions about what your delusional little sister is capable of achieving. As the elevator descended toward the lobby where this morning's drama had played out, I thought about the conversation I'd have with my parents that weekend, about the difference between impossible dreams and detailed plans, about the importance of believing in your own analysis even when everyone around you thinks you're wrong. Most importantly, about the fact that sometimes the biggest opportunities come disguised as humiliating failures, and the people who are quickest to protect you from embarrassment are often the ones who understand your potential the least. The elevator doors opened onto the marble lobby where I'd been turned away 8 hours earlier. This time, I walked through it with a signed contract in my briefcase and the satisfaction of knowing that every person who doubted me today was about to discover exactly how wrong they'd been about what was possible. 3 months later, I was standing in the same conference room where everything had changed, but this time, the energy was completely different. The massive presentation screen displayed charts that told a story of transformation so dramatic that even I had trouble believing the numbers were real. Digital engagement across all target demographics is up 67%, I announced to the packed room of Meridian executives, board members, and invited industry analysts. Lead generation from social platforms has increased by 143%, with conversion rates that exceed our most optimistic projections by 30%. David Morrison was grinning like someone who just discovered oil in his backyard. Miss Chen, when you presented your 90-day projection, I thought you were being overly ambitious. These results suggest you were actually being conservative. The transformation had been swift and comprehensive. Within 2 weeks of signing the contract, I'd identified and terminated Meridian's relationship with Blackstone Creative, though not before conducting the thorough audit that revealed the full scope of their manipulation. The evidence I'd compiled, combined with internal financial records, painted a picture of systematic market manipulation that the SEC was now investigating with the intensity of a federal task force. But the real satisfaction had come from building something new. I'd assembled a team of digital marketing specialists who understood that the landscape had shifted fundamentally in the past 2 years. Instead of treating social media as a broadcasting platform, we turned it into a conversation space where Meridian's expertise could shine through authentic engagement with industry professionals and potential clients. The TikTok strategy alone had generated more qualified leads in 90 days than Blackstone Creative had produced in 18 months. We'd partnered with tech influencers who genuinely used and understood Meridian's products, creating content that felt natural rather than forced. The results spoke for themselves: a 40% increase in brand recognition among professionals under 35 and a waiting list for product demonstrations that stretched into the next quarter. The most significant achievement, I continued, isn't just the immediate revenue impact, though that's substantial. We've fundamentally shifted how the market perceives Meridian from a traditional corporate entity to an innovative industry leader. Our competitors are now studying our strategies and trying to replicate our approach. Catherine Price, who had emerged from the Blackstone scandal with her reputation not only intact but enhanced, nodded toward a slide showing competitor response patterns. 3 of our major rivals have completely restructured their digital marketing approaches in the past month, specifically to counter strategies that Sarah's team pioneered. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months ago, I'd been the one analyzing competitors' successful tactics and wondering why Meridian wasn't implementing them. Now, other companies were reverse engineering our innovations and struggling to match the authentic relationships we'd built with online communities. The platform diversification strategy has been particularly effective, I explained, clicking to a breakdown of engagement across different digital channels. Rather than concentrating resources on Facebook and LinkedIn, where our competitors were already established, we focused on emerging platforms where we could define the conversation rather than join it. The results from Discord and Reddit had been especially impressive. Professional forums dedicated to enterprise technology had become unexpected sources of high-value leads, as our team engaged in genuine technical discussions rather than obvious marketing pitches. Industry professionals began seeking out Meridian representatives for insights on implementation challenges and best practices, transforming our digital presence from vendor to trusted advisor. Miss Chen, the CFO, interrupted, "I have to ask about the cost efficiency. These results are remarkable, but how do they compare to our previous agency's expenses?" I smiled, having anticipated this question.
Total marketing spend is down 37% from the Blackstone creative budget, while delivering the results you've seen. The efficiency comes from targeting precision rather than broad demographics, and authentic engagement rather than paid promotion volume. Morrison leaned back in his chair, the expression of someone who'd made a very good decision. Sarah, I think it's time we discuss expanding your role beyond the original consulting contract. The formal offer came 2 days later. Chief Digital Strategy Officer, with equity participation and a budget that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. But even more satisfying than the title or compensation was the recognition that my analysis had been correct from the beginning. Meridian's problems weren't complex market forces or impossible competitive disadvantages. They'd been trusting the wrong people with their most important strategic decisions. The Sunday dinner where I shared the news was everything I'd imagined it would be. Mom had made her famous lasagna, and Dad was in one of his philosophical moods, discussing the importance of persistence in business. Marcus and Elena arrived 30 minutes late, apologizing for traffic while clearly having spent the drive discussing how to handle their sister's latest career announcement. So, Sarah, Elena began carefully, using the tone she reserved for discussions with unstable relatives. How's the consulting work going? Are you finding it sustainable? I waited until everyone had served themselves before responding. Actually, I have some news about that. Meridian Industries offered me a permanent position, Chief Digital Strategy Officer. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus stopped chewing mid-bite, and Elena looked like she was trying to process a foreign language. Chief Digital Strategy Officer? Dad repeated slowly. At Meridian Industries, the Fortune 500 company. The same Meridian Industries where you claimed to have gotten a consulting contract 3 months ago, Marcus added, his voice carefully neutral. I pulled out my phone and showed them the press release that had gone live that morning. Meridian Industries announces appointment of Sarah Chen as Chief Digital Strategy Officer, following record-breaking quarter driven by revolutionary digital marketing strategies. Elena reached for the phone, reading the entire article twice before handing it back. Sarah, I don't understand. 3 months ago, you were living in someone's spare room with a failed business. 3 months ago, I was conducting research that nobody else was willing to do, identifying opportunities that everyone else had missed, and preparing for possibilities that you all thought were impossible. I looked around the table at my family's stunned expressions. The spare room gave me time to focus without distractions. The failed business taught me lessons about client management and market analysis that I wouldn't have learned any other way. Marcus set down his fork entirely. But how did you go from being escorted out of their building to becoming a C-suite executive? I spent the next hour walking them through the entire process, from the initial research that had uncovered Blackstone Creative's manipulation to the board presentation that had changed everything. I explained how the SEC investigation had not only vindicated my findings, but established my credibility as someone who could identify complex business problems that others missed. The thing is, I said, you both assumed that because my previous business had failed, I wasn't capable of succeeding at a higher level. But failure taught me to do deeper research, to understand markets more thoroughly, and to prepare for every possible objection or challenge. Elena was shaking her head slowly. Sarah, we thought we were protecting you from more disappointment. We didn't want to see you hurt again. I know you meant well, but protection based on assumptions about my limitations became the biggest obstacle to recognizing my actual capabilities. I pulled up the financial projections for my new role, numbers that represented the kind of career advancement that neither Marcus nor Elena had achieved in their respective fields. The board meeting you tried to prevent me from attending became the most important presentation of my professional life. Not because I got lucky, but because I'd prepared for 18 months to solve exactly the problems they needed to solve. Dad was grinning with the pride of someone whose unconventional daughter had vindicated every lesson he'd ever taught about persistence and preparation. Sarah, your grandmother would have loved this story. She always said that the people who think they're protecting you from failure are often the ones who prevent you from discovering what you're truly capable of achieving. The conversation continued for another 2 hours, with Marcus and Elena gradually shifting from shock to curiosity about how I'd identified the opportunity and executed the strategy. By dessert, they were asking detailed questions about my research methods and wanting to understand the competitive analysis that had impressed the Meridian board. "One thing I don't understand," Marcus said as we cleared the table, "is how you stayed so confident when everyone around you was saying it was impossible." I thought about that question while loading the dishwasher. I think the confidence came from the research itself. When you spend 6 months analyzing every aspect of a company's market position, you start to see patterns that aren't visible from the outside. The more I learned about Meridian's challenges, the more convinced I became that I understood their problems better than the people they were paying to solve them. But weren't you terrified of being wrong, of making a fool of yourself in front of all those executives? I was terrified, I admitted, but I was more terrified of spending the rest of my career wondering what would have happened if I'd never tried. The worst-case scenario wasn't public embarrassment. It was giving up on something I knew I could achieve because other people couldn't see the possibility. 3 weeks later, the Wall Street Journal ran a feature article about Meridian's digital transformation, with my photo on the front page of the business section. The headline read, "From Startup Failure to Fortune 500 Success, How Sarah Chen Revolutionized Corporate Digital Strategy." The article detailed not just the remarkable results we'd achieved, but the unconventional path that had led to my appointment and the broader implications for how companies identify and develop strategic talent. Marcus texted me a photo of the newspaper with a message, "Proud of you, sis. Sorry we didn't see it sooner." Elena called that evening to apologize more formally and to ask if I'd consider speaking at one of her charity events about entrepreneurship and persistence. I think a lot of people could benefit from hearing how you turned what looked like failure into such extraordinary success. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months later, at the annual industry conference where I'd been invited to deliver the keynote address on digital innovation strategies. The audience was packed with marketing directors, CMOs, and digital strategy consultants from companies across the Fortune 500. In the front row sat representatives from 3 different companies that had tried to poach me from Meridian, offering compensation packages that reflected the industry's recognition of what I'd accomplished. Behind them were dozens of professionals who'd reached out over the past year, seeking advice on everything from platform-specific content strategies to competitive intelligence gathering. The biggest mistake organizations make, I told the audience, is assuming that innovative solutions must come from traditional sources. Some of the most valuable insights come from people who've experienced failure, who've had time to observe industries from the outside, and who've been motivated by rejection to develop unconventional approaches. After the presentation, a young woman approached me during the networking reception. She looked familiar, and it took me a moment to realize why. She was wearing the same expression of determined desperation I'd had 6 months earlier, the look of someone with ideas that nobody else believed in. "Miss Chen, I've been following your story since the Wall Street Journal article. I'm wondering if you have any advice for someone who's identified opportunities that everyone else thinks are impossible." I smiled, remembering myself in that cafe 3 blocks from Grandview Tower, crafting the email that would change everything. My advice is to do the research, not just surface-level analysis, but deep investigation that reveals things other people have missed, and then find a way to present that research to people who have the authority to act on it. But what if they won't listen? What if they think you're not qualified? Then you find leverage that makes them listen. Information they need, problems they can't solve, opportunities they haven't recognized. The key is to become so valuable to the right person at the right moment that they can't afford to ignore you. She thanked me and walked away with the determined expression of someone who just received permission to pursue something everyone else thought was crazy. 6 months later, I read about her in Forbes, having launched a successful consulting firm that specialized in exactly the kind of unconventional market analysis that had launched my own career. The industry had changed, and I'd been part of changing it. Companies that had previously relied on established agencies and traditional approaches were now actively seeking out independent consultants and unconventional thinkers who could identify opportunities that conventional wisdom missed. Standing in my corner office at Meridian, looking out at the city skyline that had witnessed my transformation from failed entrepreneur to industry leader, I realized that the most important lesson wasn't about business strategy or digital marketing innovation. It was about the difference between impossible dreams and thorough preparation, between delusional thinking and unconventional insight, between the limitations other people see in your situation and the possibilities you can create when you refuse to accept those limitations as permanent. My siblings had tried to protect me from disappointment by convincing me to accept a smaller vision of what was possible. Instead, they'd motivated me to prove that their assumptions about my potential were as wrong as their assumptions about what I could achieve. Sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who understand your capabilities least. And sometimes the biggest opportunities disguise themselves as humiliating failures, waiting for someone determined enough to transform rejection into preparation and preparation into success. The board meeting had started at 9, exactly as scheduled, but nobody could have predicted where it would end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.